Hi everyone and welcome. This is the Desteni I Process live Google Hangout. We do Hangouts every Thursday, and right now we're walking a series of Hangouts about Desteni, the Desteni I Process courses, and the Desteni principles and tools. And in this Hangout, we're going to talk about agreements and relationships and what the difference is between a so-called normal relationship and an agreement as we talk about it within Desteni and the Desteni material. So to discuss this, I have invited two people here, and we have Peter with us from Holland. Hey, Peter.
Hi.
And how long is it that you've been in your relationship with your partner?
It's now it has been 18 years now.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And we have Kelly with us from Seattle in the USA. Hey, Kelly.
Hi.
I never know whether to call it the US or the USA or America.
You know, that's funny because I was just filling something out and I had to put the country last night and I wasn't sure either. So I put US or USA.
Okay. Okay. And how long have you been in your relationship or your agreement?
I think it's been just about exactly 3 years. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So I want to start out by asking you guys, especially for the people that are watching and that has never heard about agreements before and what the difference is between an agreement and a relationship. If you guys could explain what is an agreement and how is it different from a relationship. Do you want to go first, Kelly?
Sure. I would say that you kind of have to also look at how relationships are to kind of see how agreements are different. And whereas, in how relationships are currently, it's kind of about two people coming together to kind of live out all their ideas and beliefs and perceptions about relationships, which is usually a lot of stuff, how a man is supposed to be, how a woman is supposed to be, and, even your own individual ideas and hopes and things. And then kind of living that out, acting according to those ideas and beliefs, and not actually just kind of being here as yourself. And whereas an agreement is more about you getting to know yourself and another being as who you actually are, rather than acting out these kind of ideas about relationships. And within that, one of the fundamental differences with an agreement is that the focus is really about focusing on your responsibility in the relationship. And within this, you're also learning how to be responsible in any relationship with anyone. But the agreement is kind of the focal point where you start doing this. So it's kind of like a personal process. It's like a tool for your personal process of, discovering your self-responsibility and basically how to live with other beings, because that's kind of our primary issue here in humanity, is that we, have trouble with our relationships and getting along, and so an agreement is like our way to work on that issue with just one person in a simplified version of a group setting. And so it's quite different, I would say, from your typical relationship where it's more just about even you can say entertainment and just kind of keeping each other the way you are, instead of actually being open to change yourselves, where it's more like, the phrase "I love you just the way you are" comes up, because it's more about just stay how you are, you're fine, everything's fine, and with all your faults and everything, instead of, where an agreement is more about focusing on how can we actually change ourselves and perfect ourselves and support each other to do that. So those are some of the fundamental differences I see between relationships and agreements.
Okay, well, I can't hear anybody.
Go for it. Go for
Okay,
it.
so there was a lag actually. Yeah, we were connected to several places on the world, so we're experiencing some lagging here in our communication. Okay, from my point of view, being in an agreement right now, I started observing other people, seeing what actually it is, what it means to be in a relationship, and I recognized, of course, also specific points I was living myself in relation to a relationship with my partner. And I see that actually a relationship, you could define it as something that is defined by, well, genetic stuff, cultural stuff, and it might be different the way people go or deal with each other related to the different cultures they're living in. So I've lived in several countries, and I've seen a different way of how boys and girls meet or deal with each other at specific ages, and going on into older ages, how those relationships um, develop, or how actually they're not really living really together. You see, for instance, in the northern European countries, and probably also in the United States, it should be the same, that families tend to live a little bit more a life together. If you look to cultures more around the Mediterranean Sea, more south towards Africa, maybe also the same for Central America, there you see that life is a little bit more social, meaning that you're living more on the street, and there is a larger separation between the roles of man and wife, etc. So there you see that they tend to do specific women-related things and specific men-related things, etc. So that's interesting things, but they are absolutely part of something that we can call relationships that have been defined within our cultures and within the way we always have lived for millennia. And there it is very interesting entering into what we call an agreement, because that is opening a completely different point of view of how you're going to deal with each other. So it's actually a kind of assisting you in getting or becoming aware of how you have to deal with each other, how you have to live together, how you can support each other in living together, and also support yourself through your partner. So that is really cool. And further on in this discussion, we will go into details. But that is specifically the way I've lived it. Actually, uh, like I said before, I've been married for more than 18 years now. So the relationship started there for me in a very natural way. It was my first and my last real relationship I had, so I don't have any comparisons with others, etc. So I'm pretty clean on that point. And when my partner proposed to start with an agreement without knowing really what it meant, I said, okay, yes, let's do it, let's go for it. It sounded good to me. It's connected very well to what I see is being respectful towards other people within a situation where we live together. So yeah, well, that was my starting point. So that's quite a lot of years ago. I don't remember that. It's maybe 6 years ago, something, that we decided to get into an agreement. I was not wearing my wedding ring anymore because it fell off my fingers. I was a fat guy when I married, and then I became thinner, so I lost it. So I put it away, and then my partner decided also to put the ring away, because that was not anymore what we wanted to express. We wanted to approach it from a different point. Okay, I will stop here.
Yeah. I want to ask you more about that later. I just want to quickly just bring it back to the basics in terms of how an agreement is what we in Desteni call a relationship that is redefined, so to speak. And we actually have an agreement course, a redefining relationship course that you can walk, not necessarily specifically to go into an agreement, but to simply redefine what does it mean to be in a relationship. And then also that an agreement consists in this context of two people who are walking the destiny process and who decide to walk that process together, and for example live with each other if that is practical. Obviously it depends on the situation. It could also in principle be people simply living together, but what we're discussing here is, you know, changing the intimate relationship with a partner to a relationship based on an agreement. That's why it's called an agreement, that I'm walking this process, you're walking this process, we share the principles that are presented by Destiny and the tools, and we would like to walk that together and support each other. So just to give like a basic overview of that. And I forgot to say when we started the Hangout that if you're watching out there and you have any questions about relationships or agreements, anything you want to ask, we will do our best to give perspectives on it. If you already are in a relationship, or you would like to be in one, or simply have any questions, go for it, and we will see what comes up as we continue with the Hangout. So in relation to the difference between a relationship and an agreement, can you guys share some like practical examples that you've noticed since you, for you, Peter, it was changing your relationship to an agreement, and Kelly, you started the agreement, you know, from scratch. So you weren't in a normal relationship with your partner first, you started with being in an agreement. So what are some of the practical differences, like in your daily life? For example, in relation to emotions that comes up, or it could be jealousy. What examples can you guys share to exemplify the differences?
Well, maybe I will start with that because I'm the guy that changed into from one situation to another. And the funny thing is that actually it was not such a big change, at least it seemed so at the beginning. If you look back, well, definitely there are a lot of changes. One of the changes, of course, that both of us are walking the whole Destiny process, meaning that we are more and more becoming aware of a lot of points. And at the start, also, we had to define quite a lot of things that we took for granted or we left untouched, and that's the biggest difference between being in a relationship or being in an agreement. Because in a relationship situation, being a wife, eventually you accept that your husband, when he comes home, is tired and he's grumpy and not willing to discuss specific points, etc., without discussing this point and making clear that eventually this kind of behavior is not accepted. If you are in agreement, this is definitely a point you are going to talk about and see how you can find a balance there. And eventually, maybe as a working husband, you have to work on the fact that you are living in too much of a stress in your job situation, for instance, and reacting this situation off at home onto other people and getting mad or reacting on the tiniest things or whatever it is. And that is definitely a difference between the two situations, that it is much easier because the starting point is that you agree on things with each other, that you can discuss about different points. This doesn't exclude that you will have a fight once in a while, but it's not an endless fight where at the end nothing is solved. It is constructive. What you do is you reflect to your partner what is going on. And not always you might do it the proper way, but that is part of the game. So you can start afterwards when you calm down, analyzing what happened and see what your starting point is. Always very important. And it's definitely another point we're going to touch later, is what is the starting point of starting a relation or an agreement. And yes, there you can see, especially in time, a lot of small changes, especially in the way you deal with each other and you discuss about points, and yeah, actually you're adding, you're experiencing together and magnifying it, and actually you're managing to go through the process faster than when you should do it on your own. So that's the nice thing of being in an agreement, that you're kind of boosting each other in your process. So that's really great, and giving each other support, and getting rid of all this cultural and whatever luggage you brought with you, and ideas and perceptions, whatever it is that like, for instance, if you made a fight, you have to come back the next day with a flower to give you to your partner in order to make it up, and that kind of stuff. That doesn't work, because it's just materialistic things, and well, yeah.
That's a really cool example. And also how you say that what actually happens in the agreement, which is also why your process accelerates, is that it challenges you. You can't just leave things unturned or ignore them, because that is part of the agreement, which we're walking in our process, whether we're in an agreement or not, is that I am responsible for me. If I have reactions, it is my responsibility to change myself. And so in an agreement, you have someone that agrees on the same principle and that will see that and will support you. So let's look at some other examples, Kelly.
Yeah, well, I can compare between like previous relationships I've had, and how it's different now is, you know, for example, in previous relationships, without that starting point of, you know, taking it to your self-responsibility, there can be just kind of a free license on, like, blaming your partner for anything, little things that would happen, and you can just go and, you know, oh, why did they do this? Why didn't they do that? Why didn't you take out the trash? And, you know, I mean, we see this all the time in relationships, that kind of, like, antagonizing and bickering, and, you know, in some cases it can lead into, you know, big fights and stuff, and that, like Peter was saying, don't get resolved, and it just kind of builds and builds. And I had this happen in many relationships, where it just got to that point of, you know, you just kind of build up little things against the person the whole time. Why did they do this? Why didn't they do that? You know, because they don't fit in to the idea of the kind of partner that you want to have. And how that changes with an agreement is that you, because you're taking it back to a point of self-responsibility, those points don't build up, and you don't build up this blame against the other person. You have to actually focus on yourself. And the cool thing with that is that it's a much nicer relationship because it's not this whole, you know, kind of like building this secret hate towards the other person the whole time. But you actually get things sorted out as you go, because when you take self-responsibility for what you've done, it allows the situation to actually diffuse. And because when both partners, or maybe one partner, is holding on to that blame towards the other, it can't go anywhere, and eventually the relationship is going to fail. And that's why so many relationships fail, is because the partners just build up too much against one another, and then they can't be together anymore. So within the agreement, that's what's really been different, is taking it to self-responsibility, taking responsibility for what we do. And I mean, that's why it's lasted for so long. Because you know, if we hadn't have done that, have taken self-responsibility, it would have just gone the same path as any relationship before. So, but really, so I mean, that basic point of, you know, where we might react towards something that the other person does is like a simple thing, but that covers so much of like a relationship, because that can be a lot of what comprises a relationship. And I mean, there's so many examples that come up within that, like anything that your partner does that you would want to go into reaction towards, or how could they do this, or why did they do this, or oh, they always do this. And what's fascinating to find is that when you don't go into a blame point and you take responsibility for your reactions, what opens up is the possibility to actually find solutions for whatever the situation was. And like Peter was saying, you find a way to actually deal with one another, like to live together effectively. You can sort these things out. Like instead of just going into this big reaction of blame and stuff, which doesn't solve anything, you can rather say, well, let's look at the situation that happened. What would we rather do that would be more effective to work it out? And, there's so much potential and possibilities within that, where you can work out, well, okay, let's share the burden of chores, and let's do this, and you work it out so that, everybody's having the best time possible, and everything's getting done, and everything is running smoothly. And so it's kind of like a complete 180 from the relationship scenarios that I had, where it was more about this competition and this game, like a scorekeeping game. Oh, they didn't do this. Oh, they did it again. Oh, now they've done it again. And it's like you're keeping the score against them, and vice versa. And it actually becomes just this kind of war zone instead of what it really should be, which is two people, coming together as physical human beings here to live and express together. And that's been a cool kind of benchmark point for me, is to kind of always take it back to that point when stuff is going on and there's reactions coming up and whatever, to realize, like, well, wait, why aren't we just here as two beings living, expressing? What is all this other stuff? And that's really helped to kind of sort all that stuff out. Yeah.
Yeah, I can share an example of what you were saying in relation to the chores, for example, because I think that's something that every relationship, all couples face this point of having fights about the chores and the cleanings. Maybe not all couple, but a lot of couple. And so when my partner and I started our agreement, we moved in together, and we had completely different life stories, completely different experiences growing up, and so of course we had completely different relationships to what it means to clean and who has to do what. And so, in a so-called normal relationship, or in most of the relationships that I have been in, it's like everything kind of just happens. No one really has any direction, or it's like you were saying, it's just reacting upon reacting. But here we have tools, real practical tools. For example, in terms of saying, okay, so you're saying that it should be this way, but have you looked at, is that a belief? Is that an idea? Okay, you know what? Something we, for example, realized that we both had a tendency of wanting to do things because that's how our mothers did it. And then we would have these arguments where it was like, but my mom didn't do it like that. My mom always said, and then we could have a big laugh about it because it's ridiculous. And then we could look at, okay, so that's how our mothers did it, but how would it be practical? How would we like to do it? And then, these amazingly simple practical solutions that you were talking about, Kelly, they emerge, and you realize that they were always here. And they were always available, but that we were, drowning in all these ideas and beliefs and like you were saying, Peter, cultural forms of programming that we're carrying with us into the relationship. So an agreement is really giving relationships those practical tools that we've never had, because in these normal relationships we think that it's supposed to be love that binds it all together. Sometimes also values, but mostly it's love. And as I think all of us have experienced, it just doesn't work like that in practical reality. Yeah, so, and I will again remind the viewers that you can still ask questions. We haven't gotten any questions yet. I want to ask you guys about, for those who are walking the process and who are wondering, if I wanted to enter into an agreement and I'm walking Desteni with Desteni and I'm walking my writings, when do I know that I'm ready? How do I know that I'm ready to go into an agreement? Do you guys have any perspectives on that?
Can I start?
Yes, go for it.
Actually, never and always, from my point of view, because actually, if you look from a perfect starting point, you will probably never be ready to start an agreement, because you are in a process. So that's not the point. So your question eventually is, when do you think you might be ready to start an agreement? And that might be and that is a point of self-honesty you have to find in yourself, is to see, okay, when am I able to know enough of myself in order to be able to go into a situation where I have to relate in self-honesty with another person, being able to give honest feedback and also be prepared to get feedback over myself from my partner. And that is actually, if you can manage to pinpoint that point in self-honesty, from my point of view, that should be, yeah, well, then you can risk it. Let's say it that way. You can have a go, and eventually it doesn't go well because something comes up, or points that you cannot transcend or whatever. That's possible, but you have to live it, and that is the most important thing.
Cool, Peter. Yeah, an agreement is not going to Disneyland. After dark. But Kelly, if we look at this point of when is a person ready to go into an agreement, and then also relating that to how our agreements fundamentally are based on our self-agreements, what would you say about that?
Yeah, I would say that the primary point that needs to be in place would be that you've made the decision to take self-responsibility, to take responsibility for yourself and your reactions and your actions. And I mean, you can certainly, start an agreement at any time, but if you haven't yet made that starting point decision, it's going to probably not go so well, and is going to just become another relationship. But how I would reference it in terms of whether one is ready is just a kind of it's kind of a self-evaluation thing where you look at, well, as Peter was saying, do I see myself as ready to go into that with another person and face myself and take responsibility for myself. And within that, like he was saying, you're never going to be like 100% ready for it. You can't predict everything that's going to happen. And so at some point, you just have to jump in. So there's not particularly any rules one way or the other. You just kind of have to feel it out, and depending on the opportunities that you have,
And commit to it.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I can share the what you should not do example from my own agreement, which was that I went into my agreement based on desires for a relationship and based on sexual desires as well, and I was lying to myself about it. And I was saying that it was an agreement that I wanted, but really it was just a relationship. And when I entered into it, I didn't really have that starting point of this is actually an agreement. So it took me 2 years and much conflict within myself. And like Peter was saying, it was actually only when I made that full commitment, I'm going to walk this after 2 years of living with each other that the agreement actually started. So there was this entire pre-period that I can see would have been unnecessary had I cleared my starting point from the beginning. But yeah, so that's what I would suggest. Clear your starting point, be self-honest about the desires, rather face them, than making it into, oh, but I want an agreement, when maybe that's not the case. And then also that the agreement is at all times, throughout, it doesn't change when you have made the agreement, is that it is based on my self-agreement. If my self-agreement does not stand, the agreement cannot stand. And as I expand myself in my self-agreement, the agreement with my partner can expand. And when both partners do that, that's when it starts getting really cool. But that there is no, it's like, because that's also something that I discovered from making a lot of mistakes, is that I thought that the agreement was supposed to kind of carry me, because that's what I learned from relationships. Like, the relationship is supposed to sort everything out. And it just didn't work, and I kept being like, oh, this agreement is not working. But I was the one that wasn't working. I was the one that wasn't fully committed. So yeah, that's what I would suggest. We have some questions coming in here. So
Can I go for just an introduction to Caroline's question?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
But just let's. I'm just gonna select the questions so that the viewers can see it. If you want, you can also read it out loud so that people know what you're talking about.
Okay, so actually you put Joanna's question first now, but I don't want to. Yeah, okay.
No, the one in blue is Caroline.
Yeah, it was a lag, of course. It took some time before I started. Okay, so the question from Caroline is on the jealousy point. How can one support oneself when one is in an agreement with another and the point of jealousy is encountered? How can one practically assist and support oneself to practically face and walk jealousy? This after writing self-forgiveness. I want to just introduce this point because just relating to myself, I always said I'm not a jealous guy. And I was convinced about that point for a very, very long time. But looking back, I have lived jealousy, not in this relation, but in relations actually that never came to reality. But I was definitely jealous from a point that I felt inferior compared to other people at school, in relation to girls that I liked and other were interested in other guys, etc., and not in me. And I started to become jealous about that point, just because they're not looking at me and just looking at the other. So, from my point of view, it has to do with myself feeling less than other people, and also imagining something that is causing this jealousy. But I have very little experience with real jealousy, so this is as far as I can go. Maybe you, Kelly, can hook into it and go a little bit deeper into it.
Yeah, let's throw it to Kelly.
So
you made a song about jealousy.
Yeah. But I think that's maybe a different jealousy. I'm not sure, because there's the jealousy of, say, being jealous for your partner, like if they're interacting with others and you feel like, oh, what are they, do they have designs on someone else, or but then there's the jealousy kind of within the relationship of where like you're jealous of things that they have or that they do or that they are, and which is what the song is particularly about, which actually that song kind of came about because I was particularly facing that point.
You wrote a song about it. That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, we wrote that song to really kind of try and embody that experience. And so
we'll put a link to the song in the description so you guys listen to it afterwards.
A good idea.
So with that point, basically I had to make the decision uh, to take self-responsibility for that. And within that, it's because I saw the consequence of it. You know, I didn't like the experience of jealousy. I didn't like the consequence that it had on my agreement that I was walking. And it doesn't, you know, whatever you're being jealous towards, it doesn't, the act of being jealous doesn't solve it, you know. It doesn't get you what it is that you wanted. I mean, that's something that has to be sorted out. So for me, I had to take that point and look at, why was I jealous? What was it about? Is there a practical way to deal with that? You know, did I try communicating with my partner, for example, about the point and saying, hey, I would also like to participate in that point. Is there any way that I can be included as well? You know, I mean, we don't tend to consider just like openly communicating about something with a partner. And so that's one thing that I would suggest in terms of the jealousy point, because that's what really worked for me within that, was to actually...
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it was just to actually consider that point of, because the jealousy point is kind of like, oh, there's something that I want, but I can't have it. But who said you can't necessarily have it? You know, did you try asking? You know, that like never occurred to me. So, yeah.
Or Carolyn, you could write a song about it. But something that I do, and this is more in relation to the other kind of jealousy, but it could be used in relation to this kind of jealousy. But if I become jealous of my partner and thinking, oh, now this paranoia comes up, you know what I do? I go and I talk to him about it, and we have a big old laugh, and we just laugh and laugh. And really, in the beginning, I didn't laugh. Maybe he laughed. But just speaking to my partner immediately and not making a big deal out of it, and just saying, hey, so you know what happened? I got jealous. And the more that we've done that, the more it's just become this silly, funny thing that we don't really take seriously. And the more that I've done that, the more I've been able to simply just let it go. Like, I don't even, just that point of sharing it and laughing about it and then letting it go, that has really assisted me a lot.
Exactly, you're actually touching a good point there, that if you have something, you have to discuss it immediately, not keep it for a while, because it might grow into something that is out of proportion. So, and definitely that is possible in an agreement, because you have this agreement and you can talk about those points without making fun of the other, and respecting each other in those points. Yeah, I agree with that.
Cool. Let's look at Joanna's question. So she's asking, hi guys, one point that I found a resistance was to make an agreement in relation to the financial dimension in our life. Can you share your input as how you've walked this point together with your partner? I noticed that it can lead to conflict backchat. And we actually talked about this in a previous hangout, so I will link to that also in the description below afterwards. But I've walked this in my agreement. I don't know about you guys. And in my agreement, it was specifically towards my partner having more money than me. And again, it was one of these points where we came into the agreement with completely different life experiences. I grew up not having a lot of money, creating a very particular relationship with money. My partner grew up in a different environment. And so, and you know what is so interesting is that when we come into relationships, we don't discuss such points. We don't sit down in the beginning and say, okay, so how should we deal with finances? You know, it just kind of happens, and then you don't know how to deal with it. So we sought assistance and support in our fellow Destonians, and we realized that the most commonsensical, because we're living together and sharing our lives, for us at least, is to simply share everything equally. Because one person might be in a place where they earn more money now, but then maybe in 5 years it will be different, you don't know. So it has been a lot more simplistic, you know, instead of, I don't know if that's what you're asking about, but that was the conflict for us. It was about my money and your money and who gets what. And since we started just being completely equal with it, there hasn't been any conflicts about it at all. But it took a process to get to that in terms of facing our relationship with money, like Peter was saying earlier, the baggage that we had carried with us that we had to let go of to establish this principle. So Kelly and Peter, do you have anything to share to that?
Oh yes, actually the money point, the financial point is a very tricky one. In my case it was not very difficult because when we met 18 years ago I was without a job, looking for another job, and my partner had a job, so she was the one with the money, with the car. I didn't, etc. But that was not the point. We definitely later on faced several situations related to money. We also lived in a specific situation where very, very little money. But one thing that we agreed on was to have a shared responsibility in that. And far before we started an agreement, we already agreed on this point that the person having the best chances to get a good job was the one going for it without holding too much to a specific role pattern that the man has to have the best job, etc. It turned out that I was the one with the job that made the most money, but it could have been exactly the same the other way around. So we were completely open to that point. But I can imagine that it is pretty tricky, and you have to be very clear about the shared responsibilities, meaning that when you make decisions about money, buying a house together and that kind of stuff, you really have to be very sound on how you stand at that point and how you're going to deal with the consequences of those decisions together and not on your own.
Cool, Peter. Very cool perspectives. Anything you want to add? Anything to that, Kelly?
Yeah, basically, we did something that was pretty similar, to you, Anna, was where, we realized that principle of, it shouldn't matter who necessarily is getting more money, and, we wanted to break down those ideas of my money, your money, and so we decided to also to just share all the money. And, because like Peter's saying, maybe it's the one person will make more, maybe the other, or maybe it'll change, and that has happened. At some points I was making more money, at some points they were making more money, but we decided that the best way to kind of assist us to get over any points of money, kind of like wanting to hold on to my money and having as much as possible for me, and like those points of like essentially kind of greed and self-interest, but rather to establish that starting point of that we're in this for us together as a whole, and as long as we're both doing what we can to contribute it in our ways and according to what abilities we are able to, not making it personal. It's not about, oh, well, I make more money. And I mean, because I had this in previous relationships where it was like, maybe they didn't have a job and I would hold that against them, and I would feel entitled to the money that I had because I earned it, and I didn't want to share it and all that. So we wanted to sort all that out, so the best way to do that was just to share the money. And within this, like any of the fears that came up that we would have in terms of like, well, what if I want to buy something for me, but it's our money? And so we just talked about this stuff and discussed it beforehand to make sure that it would work out. And we decided, for example, like if one of us wants to make a significant purchase, we can just discuss it with each other. And within this, it's like you have to kind of trust yourself and trust your partner to realize that it's not like one of us is going to go out and buy a jet plane or something, and compromise the agreement, We're going to make, trust each other to make decisions that are, practical and not insane or anything. So, yeah, and so then it's worked quite well to just, share the point.
Cool. Yeah, and I will also say that I don't know if the conflicts that you were mentioning, Joanna, was specifically towards this point, But in general, I would say, like Kelly talked about earlier, is that the point is to, release and let go of any backchat, any conflict, any baggage, so that you can get to the practical solution. Because once you get to that, it's usually very simple. Oh, okay, that's how we can do it. Yeah, so it will only be a problem if there are, all these ideas and beliefs and backchat within you. We have some comments going on in Spanish and perhaps also in another language. I'm not sure which language that is.
Me
Guys,
neither.
I don't know. This is an English-speaking language. I apologize for that. Maybe there will be Spanish-speaking hangouts at a different time. I'm not able to read Spanish, so if you could please post your questions in English. Guys, we don't have that much time left. I have a couple of more questions, but before we go to that, there is a question from Andres. And he is asking about fear of losing my partner. How can we establish an agreement without this fear?
That's a tough one. Of course, I guess that it's very normal for anybody being both in a relationship or an agreement to have thoughts of what if I lose my partner because my partner has a car accident, whatever it is. That is definitely something that can happen very, very often, depending on what's going on. And I might still have some kind of thoughts when my partner is driving around doing her things, etc. What happens if she gets into a car accident and she dies, etc. That is most of of it. I relate back to my own mind spinning around about all kind of scenarios, etc. So what I do then is to bring it back to where it came from. So what is it? What am I actually trying to do by fantasizing about the fact that eventually my partner could have a car accident? I think it's much wiser to start looking to okay, if something happens like that, we might have to agree beforehand, both of us, to what to do if one of us gets seriously injured or whatever it is. So you need to be prepared for that.
Yeah,
so you're taking away the feeding ground for all this kind of ideas that what if something happens that we didn't talk about. So that might be eventually a solution. So to be some kind of prepared, okay, if that specific situation happens, I know in what to do, or what the situation should be, etc.
You know, Andres, I've faced this point initially in my agreement, and what I realized was that this is one of the bags that we've brought with us from previous relationships. And what actually assisted me, and this can assist in other situations as well, if you have fear, is to use your imagination constructively and go to the worst case scenario in relation to the fear that you're facing. So in my situation, it would be, okay, the relationship ends, for example, or my partner gets killed, some like really worst case scenario. And then I ask myself, or I look at, okay, but if that were to happen, who am I? Because if my life would suddenly, end and I can't go on living, it shows me that I was attached, that it wasn't really an agreement based on me walking my process here, because that isn't dependent on who's walking with me. So for me, it was actually a really cool point of understanding the difference between an agreement and a relationship, in how if this agreement somehow were to end, I would still be walking my process. I'm not talking about, of course, I would be sad or I would be, mourn if my partner died. So it's not like I wouldn't care, but I would still be here. I would still be walking my process. I would still be doing the things that I've set out to do with my partner, if they were practically possible, if that makes sense. So maybe that can assist to look at that point of, that agreement is unconditional. It's not dependent on, them being there, that this is you walking unconditional.
Yeah, because it's not an agreement only with the other, it's also agreement with yourself. And, well, that the agreement with yourself should also be the point that stands, the stability point.
Yes.
That is left unchanged in whatever situation. So I think that's important.
Kelly, did you want to add anything to that question?
Well, I would say that, in terms of how to establish an agreement without that fear, is that, it's something that will have to be walked through, So just to not try and think, how can I have an agreement just without that fear already? I mean, that's part of why we go into agreements, is to see the fears that come up and then to walk through them within the agreement. So that is how to establish the agreement without the fear, is to walk through it. In like the process that you were describing is the exact same that I've done as well, is to use the imagination constructively and take myself to that worst possible scenario and say, well, what would I do? Would I just stop or die, or would I just, keep going?
And it was a surprise. When I did it, it was like, okay, but it wouldn't be any different. I would still be
I would still be here. Yeah, and so it's kind of trusting yourself to be able to, be here and not be dependent on, another person or something. And that within that you can learn a lot too, because you can look and see if there's ways in which you formed a dependency, and then you can assist and support yourself to sort those out so that you're more stable in your self-agreement.
Cool. Okay, guys, we don't have a lot of time left. I'm just quickly going to go through the last comments here. Joanna is saying, in relation to the question she asked before, thanks, Anna. The other dimension that I had resistance towards was about the idea of being financially supported by my husband at some point. It's cool to see my self-definition of independence. Communication and being practical is key. Absolutely. Cool. And then we have a comment from Gabriel, and he's saying, you will also be walking your relationship or agreement with yourself more effectively, because that is a way of living respect and love towards your partner. Peter or Kelly, do you have a comment on this? Do you agree with Gabriel?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you'll actually will, like Peter was actually mentioning earlier, of how within the agreement you can more face yourself because your partner is reflecting things back to you. Whereas if you were by yourself, alone, and without a partner, you're not going to have these things kind of in your face for you to look at, because it'd just be you there, and you're not having to get along with another person or work things out. But when you have another person in the mix, you actually are faced with someone else there who can see you and see how you're living, and how the decisions you make and the actions you take or don't take are also going to affect that other person. And so it gives you this springboard to really clarify a lot of things for yourself in terms of how are you living, how to communicate with another being. And so, I mean, you really like strengthen yourself in a way, and your own process through walking with another person.
Cool. So I have two last questions left. One is for you, Peter, and the other one is for Kelly. But Peter, I want to ask you, because we said in the beginning of the Hangout that we would discuss this, because you are representing a person who's already in a relationship, or who was already in a relationship, and then transformed that into an agreement. Can you give some tips to anyone who is already in a relationship and is wondering, how do I change it into an agreement? What if my partner doesn't want to all of those thoughts that may come up. And then Kelly, in the meantime, you can consider this. I want to ask you before we go how the Destiny and Walking the Destiny I Process courses and the agreement course, how that has assisted you in your agreement. So Peter, if we start with you.
Okay, I will try to make it short because we are running out of time. Well, what I should say is that definitely what we already said is you need to fix your starting point there. The other point which is very important is that you are in a specific level of awareness of yourself, honesty yourself, and well, more or less convinced that you're ready to start such agreement. From your partner's side, have a open communication about it, and if your partner is not aware of what it means, explain as much as possible what it means to have an agreement, and so you rehearse yourself the points that are important, and you explain it in the same time to your partner, so you both understand what you actually are deciding to do. So there is equality on that point, that you're aligned on that point. And that is also very important in an agreement, that you need to walk both the same process, because if you don't, you will risk that the one or the other is not picking up the specific points eventually, if you are not evaluating or developing on the same way. I don't say that you really need to have exactly the same level of understanding of all the different points, because one might help the other accelerate in getting to a specific point. I've seen that in our agreement, where my partner already was much further in the Destiny process than I was, but I could leverage quite a lot from her experience and from her being very, very active in that, and me having a regular full-time job. I still have less time in dedicating to being active into walking my process, but still I can leverage quite a lot of experiences and have reflections with my partner about a lot of things. So I'm learning quite a lot of things, and she is helping me with that. So, but that is my point, my perspective.
Cool. And Kelly, so I want to ask you here before we end, because we have this agreement course, which is a really cool opportunity. Do you want to quickly just share a little bit about it, or the Desteni I Process course in general?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I would say that the Desteni I Process courses in general are super supportive for agreements, because in the Desteni I Process, you really learn the details about how to walk through your own behavior patterns and stuff, so that when you're in such moments where you're having these big reactions, you'll actually be able to, in that moment, see what's going on and like radically change the outcome in that moment. So I would definitely suggest the I Process courses for the deeper kind of like mind construct understanding. And then the agreement course is like perfectly designed for agreements, because it works on sorting out, firstly, your agreement with yourself, that self-agreement. So it's the perfect tool to prepare yourself for an agreement with another person if you're not in agreement yet. So you can still take this course, if you don't have a partner. And then if you do have a partner, it's also immensely supportive, because it really walks you through, everything that I described earlier about the difference between relationships and agreements. It walks you through all that stuff, all the baggage, all the the taking self-responsibility instead of blaming the partner, and then also, it's a lot of fun, and also the point of like redefining words, which we've had in another hangout, so it might be cool to like link that one, because that's a big point within agreements as well, is to make sure that you have equal definitions of words,
Yeah,
so
we
that you
should
both
come
know.
back and do a
Yeah.
specific hangout on that, because that's a whole topic
Yeah.
in itself. We've run out of time.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
pity.
Yeah, we got through a lot of points here. If you want to know more about agreements and relationships, we'll put a bunch of links in the description below. You can obviously go to the Desteni I Process page and check it out there as well as our DIP Lite Facebook page, where we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Next week, we're going to be talking about another principle that we're working with Desteni, which is the principle of bringing it all back to self. What that means, which is in essence also what we've been talking about here. And then remember that on Saturday, every Saturday, we have the movie night hangouts, and it will be a surprise. We don't know yet which movie it will be, so you'll have to tune in and find out on Saturday. It is an hour later than this hangout. Bye, everyone. Thank you guys for being here.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Bye.